Hello and welcome. My name is Etna Traynor and I'm your host for the 23rd World Petroleum Congress webinar series called Spotlight. The World Petroleum Congress is held every 3 years and without a doubt it is one of the most important events on the global energy calendar. It's taking place in December this year, 2021, in the host city of Houston, Texas, and as you'll expect, it will present a unique series of conversations with thought leaders from around the world. Now, the World Petroleum Congress and all of the Congress sponsors are absolutely delighted to be able to bring you this series of webinars that will offer candid insights into a multitude of innovative solutions that will shape the future of energy. In our first episode, we set the scene for the state of the global energy industry. And then the second episode focused on innovating to reinvent the oil and gas industry. This is our third episode, charting the course for a sustainable energy future. And joining us for today's conversation, His Excellency Mr. Saad Sherida Al-Kaabi. He's the Minister of State for Energy in Qatar and the President and CEO of Qatar Petroleum. And Ryan Lance joins us, the Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer for ConocoPhillips. So we're really delighted to have both of these two CEOs in place. The session will be moderated by Sarah Ladislaw. She is the Senior Vice President, Director and Senior Fellow for the Energy Security and Climate Change Programme at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. So our two leaders will share their perspectives on actively reshaping the future of energy. And I'm going to hand over now to Sarah to guide us through episode 3 of Spotlight. So Sarah, great to see you. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Etna, and welcome to everybody tuning in for the discussion today. It's a great pleasure to be here with Minister Al-Kaabi and Ryan Lance for this discussion on charting a path to a sustainable energy future. Gentlemen, I'd like to spend some time today talking about the energy transition and the future of energy as you see it. As we all know, the last several decades have been extremely eventful for everybody in this industry. It started in the early 2000s with rapid energy demand growth from China, which caused very high oil and natural gas prices. It was followed by the collapse of markets and the great financial crisis in the late 2000s. Then the advent of shale gas and tight oil development in North America fundamentally transformed the global oil and natural gas landscape. And at the same time, there was a precipitous drop in renewable energy technologies, along with a global drive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that's shifted the focus for many in government and investment to lower carbon energy resources. And most recently, we've experienced this global pandemic that closed many portions of the global economy and has sent shockwaves through the industry, with some sectors proving more resilient than others. So all these shifts have been a lot to go through, and I think it's important context for the conversation about what might come next. Now, there's lots of theories out there about which companies, which fuels, which countries, which technologies will be leaders in shaping the energy future. And I'm sure that both of you see it as a very important part of your role to shape that energy future as well. So I wanted to start our discussion at a very basic place to talk to you about what are your views about the major challenges and opportunities that define this energy future as you see it. Are they similar to the ones in the past, and how are they different? So Minister Al-Kaabi, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind.
Yes. First, thank you for hosting us today and for inviting me to this prestigious conference and the great company of being with yourself and Ryan. Regarding, the future of energy, if you will, what we have been talking about for a very long time is there is an energy transition. And I think everybody is aware of the environmental challenges, and we need to have our grandchildren really live in an environment that is we should do our best to make sure that they live in a good environment, better or at least as good as we have lived in. And, as oil and gas companies, I think we have always been at the forefront of technology and making sure that societies and humanity in general have all the fuel that's required, whether it's to fuel our cars, our airplanes, gas turbines or oil turbines in the past, and also renewable energy. Even if you look at the renewable energy hemisphere, the advancements that happen there are mostly by research and funding from some of the biggest players in the oil and gas industry. So I think the challenge now is to strike a balance between what we need to leave this. How can we lead this transition as an oil and gas sector to ensure that we do everything that we can responsibly, because you need to have measure emissions, be responsible on CO2 emissions and other emissions. But I think people are getting carried away with too much discussion about renewable energy without understanding how much the conventional energy is needed for the future. When they talk about oil and they talk about automotives going to electric, but you need oil not only for automotives, you need it for a lot more in chemicals and other things that we use in our daily life. So you'll need oil for a long time. Gas is needed maybe more and can have a bigger effect in the transition because gas is the cleanest fossil fuel. So you'll have much more gas requirement for the future. Coupling that with the renewables that we've talked about, or people are talking about, whether it's solar, wind, and other renewable that can be used, but you need gas, you need oil, and I think we need to make sure that we do it in a responsible fashion to make sure that we cater for the balance that we need between oil and renewable for this transition. But oil and gas are not going away anytime soon, and it's very difficult to foresee that happening, at least in the foreseeable future.
Great. Thank you for that important message about the need for balance. Ryan, how do you see things?
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for this opportunity as well. Look forward to the Congress as it comes later this year. And hello to my good friend, His Excellency Al-Kaabi. I agree a lot with what Saad has said. It is a balance, as you've kind of said as well. I think the history has a tendency to repeat itself, and in our business, it's certainly all about low cost of supply resource. It's a commodity business that has gotten even more volatile over the last few years, certainly with the advent of the tight oil and the unconventional shale out of the U.S. And that represents some of the challenges and some of the opportunities going forward as well. I think when we look at it, there's really three challenges that this industry has, and it's providing that affordable energy to the world. And you do that by investing in those lowest cost of supply resources that can be developed under all the low carbon scenarios that we think about in the world today. I think secondly, we've got to deliver competitive returns on and of capital, and that's so important. And this industry is not done, at least on the U.S. side, it's not done a very good job delivering on that. And then thirdly, you've got to demonstrate that ESG leadership and excellence. And there's some ways to, and that's becoming more important as Saad described too. We can't afford to go through this grand experiment, with our planet. So as a company, we establish, a lot of ESG leadership attributes. We recognize that man-made emissions are impacting the climate. We've done that. We've had this position for a long period of time. We were the first U.S. E&P company to put out an emissions reduction target, and we strengthened that over the course of the last year with a Paris-aligned climate risk strategy that addresses our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And it's going to be critical for all of industry, for all of my peers, and for all of us to have a credible plan to deal with our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And then at the same time, we can supply this affordable energy to all four corners of the world. The population is growing, and we need to save, and we need to go through this energy transition along the way. So those are the dual challenges that we have in this industry. It's been around for a while. Those challenges have persisted, but certainly they've gotten more important and more critical as we think about the future over the next 20, 30, and 40 years. But even under the most extreme scenarios of climate change, or getting onto that 1.5 degree pathway still demands fossil fuels to supply that needed energy around the world. So that's that energy conundrum we're dealing with.
So I want to dig a little bit into the details of what you've both, talked about, the need to deal with these environmental challenges in much more sort of specific terms to get on these pathways to, zero carbon emissions and the like. Maybe to talk specifically about the role of natural gas, which obviously you both spend a lot of time thinking about. Natural gas is one of these fuels that, yes, it's cleaner than some of the alternatives like coal for power generation, but experiences, increasing amounts of competition, particularly in the power generation sector from the low-cost renewable resources as well. And so, Minister Al-Kaabi, obviously Qatar's been spending a very large amount of money on some new LNG facilities that have a lot of people talking. I think it would be very interesting to get your perspective, not just on why you see a promising future for natural gas, but also what are some of the uncertainties and challenges you expect to face?
Well, you see, if you look at the energy transition and whatever analysis that you review regarding the prediction of how much renewable energy is going to be part of our future, the intermittence of renewable energy is a big challenge, and I think until we can solve that, and batteries and other things you can look at also that will improve with time. But no matter how you look at it, is going to be a big need. There is going to be a big need for fossil fuels to fuel the growth of economies around the world, and especially when you look at the growth in humanity in general and in Asia specifically. I mean, that cannot be fueled without having fossil fuels as part of the mix. So gas is the cleanest fossil fuel. And I think if you look at the focus on the oil and gas industry and everybody focusing on the oil and gas industry, we have a responsibility to reduce our emissions, to ensure that we have, good measurements and really halting methane, fugitive methane emissions, CO2 emissions, sequestration. We're doing a lot of that. But if you look at the coal industry and you just take what we've just announced going from 77 million to 110 million, and we're going to spend 28 billion plus to build 4 LNG trains, to go for the first phase, and the second phase will take us to 126. And when you look at just the 4 trains of 32 million tons per annum, and you equate that to the emissions of the CO2 emissions that you would get from coal-fired plant on an equivalent basis, so taking the coal-fired power plants and equivalent volume that we are going to be producing in 2025, you can basically reduce CO2 emission by almost 130 million tons per annum. That's about 25 million cars around, roaming around the world in a year. So that shows you, that just taking out coal and replacing it with fossil fuel, although fossil fuel is not the greatest fix, but it's the best fix we have until we have something else that would come along. And if you look at what we have done in Qatar, as far as the responsibility we see that we need to take on, if you will, is that we've tagged on from the beginning of the design a full CO2 capture and sequestration as part of this plan, and we've it's already costed in that 28.575 billion that we announced, that we've spent a few $100 million to just sequester, CO2 somewhere in the range of 7 to 9 million tons when it's all said and done. Today in Qatar, we're sequestering 2.5 million tons as we speak. So we've been working at it, very hard to make sure that we are on the right end of this, if you will. But gas is definitely the future, and the growth is really going to be in gas. In addition to that, your question about risk, I think everything we do is about risk. We know we understand that we have all these planners and people looking at the future and so on. But we've taken this final investment decision without having an SPA, and we're financing it ourselves. That's how confident we are in this.
Well, excellent. And I think it's important to note how important it is to have those experiences sequestering, large amounts of carbon through projects like this. I think that's something, everybody tends to learn from. Ryan, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I share a lot of the same comments that His Excellency has thought. I think, I think the outlook is pretty bright for natural gas with decades of growth. And, it is cleaner. It burns, 40 to 55% less GHG than coal. And I think, His Excellency said it correctly. If, the fastest way that we can get the planet onto a 1.5 degree slope, one of the fastest things we can do is put some of the natural gas that's developed from Australia, what Qatar is doing to expand their facilities, exports here from the United States. And if we can get that to China and India and the developed world and avoid building all these coal-fired power plants that are coming on once a month, that's one of the fastest ways we can get onto that trajectory as a planet, because this is a global problem. And natural gas is going to be a bridge fuel that helps us get into that lower carbon future. It plays multiple relevant parts in the energy system, as excellently described, the seasonality and the intermittency of renewables. So you have to have that base load. And we've learned that here 2 weeks ago here in Texas. Of all places that's got an abundance of natural resources, it's got wind, it's got solar, it's got coal, it's got nuclear. And we didn't have enough base load capacity, and the system failed all the residents here of Texas. So it just shows how important having a full good grid and a full base system that has all those pieces and attributes are so important, and that's going to play a role around the whole world. And LNG is going to be critical. What the expansion project that Qatar is developing, they're doing it very sustainably. His Excellency described the CO2 injection and sequestration. That's going to play an important role in the future to deliver a low carbon future, including offsets and other kinds of technologies that will come available, including hydrogen that has got some challenges going forward as well. But the natural gas infrastructure that we've built is a natural bridge into that hydrogen future as well, should that technology or the green premium associated with that technology get reduced. So I think countries and regions that have pro-gas policies are going to be winners going forward, because they understand the reality of the situation that we're dealing with, and how you can bridge to that cleaner future.
So, Ryan, sticking with you for a minute, I wanted to ask you about something that Minister Al-Kaabi said in his statement, which was that, this is a business about risk, right? And you're very comfortable with risk. Even the sort of intro that I gave about sort of the landscape that we have come from in the last couple of decades was all about a changing risk environment. One of the things I'm really curious about is how you think about managing risk through partnerships, whether it's to create new technologies or to get access to new markets or geopolitical partnerships, those types of things. I'm just curious about your perspective on the importance of partnerships in being able to navigate that risk.
Yeah, I think you've brought up pretty interesting. We've long recognized, and this industry is kind of unique in that we can be competitors and partners all at the same time. That includes sort of companies that are competitors, and then certainly host nations or countries that have a national oil company. And we recognize that there's a need to do that to drive innovation, across a range of technologies. And in particular, you need to create a broad base of large-scale, low-cost, economy-wide kind of GHG emission reduction actions. And those take those kinds of public-private partnerships that you're describing. We see governments that are continuing to have their unique and in some kind of historic role in facilitating early stage pre-commercial science and technology development. That's important. There's not enough R&D across our whole industry to really match what's needed in order to get onto this low carbon future that the transition that people are trying to go through today. So we see a lot of value in those partnerships. We've had a long-standing partnership with Qatar to develop some of the lowest greenhouse gas emission LNG in the world, coming from one of the best gas fields in the world, and delivering that to customers all around the world. And we do a lot of scenario-based planning inside our company to try to address the risk. We try to look at what are the best ways to, or how do we think about mitigating this risk in order to drive to that lower carbon future? How can we be as resilient as we can possibly be as a company? We spend a lot of time thinking about that. That drives sort of where we think about developing a resource, where we think about the partnerships that are key to our success, both with our competitors, with host nations as well. And then certainly we work within our industry and our partnerships with American Petroleum Institute in some of those areas to really drive and leverage that across our industry, so we get all of industry raising the floor on some of the standards that we set for ourselves and the partnerships that we have sort of around our industry. So those are some examples of how we think about that from a risk mitigation perspective, from a scenario planning perspective, and the importance that they play in kind of how we think about the future and how we think about capital allocation.
Minister Al-Kaabi, I'd love to get your views on the same question. You know, I can imagine partnerships play a very big role in how you think about particularly developing some of the, very major long-term assets that you were talking about in your answer to the question about natural gas.
Yeah, I mean, partnerships are fundamental to the way we have developed the oil and gas industry in Qatar, and it is really to partnership in making sure that we get the best resources on any project that we have, whether it's technical resources, whether it's marketing resources, whether it's research and things that we need to do better. And I think when we work in collaboration, we all work better. And I think if you look at the partnerships that we have in Qatar, we have joint ventures with all companies. I mean, ConocoPhillips is an excellent example. Here we have a great partnership together, and we have several other American companies also working, and European companies working, whether it's oil, gas, or petrochemical. I think one of the things I'd like to just also mention when you talk about transition and the risk and partnership, I think there is a partnership that needs to happen with the government, as my good friend Ryan mentioned. And I think the risk that could be put on by or brought on by governments is having legislations and scenarios where this drive to zero carbon economy is done in a way that's not practical. And it's done theoretically or just wishful thinking in some cases. When you drive that envelope too far, what could happen is eventually the big players in oil and gas will not be developing enough resources to give you the gap that's needed between the renewable resources and the actual demand. And what you could have is underinvestment. Similar to what was caused by COVID now. I mean, people are not investing. The whole industry was hammered, if you will. So if legislation goes too hard on fossil fuel, unrealistically, I think the governments have to put a ceiling on things that needs to be done, and they need to be monitoring oil and gas company and requiring them to do more. And I think we are responsible enough to react and to do what we can. But there is a technical and a commercial capability beyond which you can't. I mean, there's a point of diminishing return, if you will, where companies will not be able to fund things that are beyond really the economic return that they would need for them to invest in these big capital projects. I mean, a capital project like an LNG project, I mean, 28 billion, this is one of the cheapest in the world. If you go somewhere else, the same project could cost you 60. Literally in some projects for 32 million, they've paid 60 billion. So I think it's very difficult to go into this transition with an energy sector that will support that transition in a big way. We're going to do it. I think everybody is very aligned to do their best, but governments have to also partner with oil and gas companies to make sure that it's done methodically, in the right way, in the right pace. I think, and the right pace is very important, because you ask somebody to do something, that can be done in 10 years, in 2 years, then it's difficult to actually accomplish. So I think that is a big risk if governments don't realize that, and I think a lot of governments are realizing that and will work in partnership with oil and gas companies.
It's really interesting because you got to an issue that I was going to ask a question about, which was these longer term net zero targets, right? We've seen a lot of countries moving into, pronouncements of net zero emissions targets by 2050. We've seen companies doing the same thing. I am curious and would like to get, both of your perspectives on what kind of signal that sends. Minister Al-Kaabi, I take your point that your concern or your message about the rate and pace of making that transition. But I'm really curious about what these 2050 targets mean to you as companies, whether they seem aspirational or they're something that you start to sort of incorporate into your longer term outlook. Maybe we will start with Ryan and then come back to you, Mr. Minister.
Well, I think they're important, Sarah. I think as we've described it, it's an ambition to get to net zero. Let me step back for a minute and say that I think if every company has a credible plan to deal with their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, the emissions that you create by the operations and whatever you do. So whether you're an oil and gas company like we are at ConocoPhillips, or you're Amazon with a bunch of delivery trucks, if you have a credible plan to deal with your Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, then we will get to a net zero. We'll get to how do you offset those emissions? How do you reduce those emissions over time? We have a plan, an ambition to get there. We don't understand today fully how to get there, but we have a plan that gets us halfway there by 2030 that's very credible. We have specific ideas and actions that we'll be taking as a company to get there. But it is going to be reliant on some new technologies over time. It's probably reliant on carbon capture and sequestration, something that Qatar is going to be doing with their expansion projects in Qatar. It's probably going to deal with offsets, although you can't get carried away some of those because we can't double and triple count offsets. But I think it is important for companies like mine and other companies, and really broadly in industry in general, to have a credible plan to deal with your own Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And then finally, I would say, for Scope 3, which gets a lot of conversation in this business, about the end use of the product that you have as a company. I think we believe that the best way to deal with that here in the U.S. and globally is through a carbon tax. So we're a member of the Climate Leadership Council, and we advocate that a market-based system like that is the way to change consumer behavior to help the energy transition move forward. We've long advocated that you need a market-based mechanism like that in order to deal with the end use of the product and try to change or impact consumer behavior if you want to get onto that energy transition. But that ends up being a bit of a lot of debate on both sides of that particular argument. But we believe that a market-based mechanism like that has the best chance of helping the energy transition. But to the point, even on a 1.5 degree scenario, the world is going to grow to 10 billion people from 7.5 billion today, and fossil fuels will still generate probably 70% of the energy required to fuel that population growth, even by 2030 and 2050. So it is really going to be an important part of the solution going forward. But if we can deal with the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, we can make that a more sustainable future for our business as well.
That's great. Minister Al-Kaabi, did you want to add anything to this, phenomenon of net zero targets by 2050?
Yeah. We came out with our 2025 strategy, and we had a plan that we were working on to announce maybe a 2050 target. And when I actually reviewed this with my management team and we were looking at what we wanted to do, I'm an engineer like Ryan. I mean, what you can measure, you can fix, so to speak. So when I looked at, when you look at 2050, if I was talking as a politician with ambition to what I want as a politician or as a human being living in a country, I would love to get net zero as soon as I can. So that's a different thing. And what my wishful thinking is, or what I'd like to achieve, is net zero. But if I can't actually put a plan to achieve that, I'm not going to announce that I will achieve that from a company point of view. So what we did is we have a 2050. We know what we're going to do to achieve these emission targets that we have. We've said we're going to reduce 25% of the emission in all our LNG plants. We're going to have net zero flaring. We're going to have or zero flaring. We're going to have 4 gigawatts of solar power. We're going to have CO2 sequestration that I mentioned earlier. So these are our plans. But I think going to net zero by 2050 and actually saying that today, I would not have a plan that I can actually trust, that I can deliver on. And I think that's what Ryan alluded to. Probably is the same thing. But if it's just to look in vogue with what others are announcing and to look good and to just give a market perception that I can deliver that, I can always say 2050 is net zero, and this 3 CEOs from now, let them worry about it. But we can't do that. We need to be responsible to actually put in place what we think we can do.
And I think that's an important point, Sarah. If I could just add for a minute, please. I think there are a lot of people gazing in their crystal ball for the next 30 years, trying to figure all that out. And I very much appreciate His Excellency's comments, because this is a business, and we've talked about this in the past. You manage what you measure, and you have to have clarity around how to get to that goal. So the goal that we've set out for ourselves is out to 2030, and we've got clarity about how to reduce our emissions by 35 to 45% through the portfolio actions that we're taking, the investments that we're making. We're not, in our company, we're not doing that through investments in wind farms and solar farms. We are adding renewable power sources to our facilities. We're doing things like putting continuous methane monitoring equipment across all our facilities, so we can see when a valve is leaking or a flange is leaking or a tank hatch is open and it shouldn't be. So those are the very, I think, credible things that you can do as a company to demonstrate your commitment to lowering your emissions, and then just have to deliver that over time. I absolutely agree with His Excellency. If it's not credible if you don't have a plan to deliver it, and you show that that's happening year in, year out in the pathway to get there. But some of it's not clear, and it's going to take new technology, and we don't know exactly what that new technology will look like today.
Great. I want to ask both of you one more question before turning to questions from our audience. And this is a little bit different, which is, we are at the sort of, in the midst of a global economic crisis caused by a pandemic. And one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about at CSIS is the way in which this economically will affect developing economies. I mean, it is not lost on anybody that the IMF says that developing economies in particular will be very hard hit and have been very hard hit by this crisis, and could cause us a lot of problems in our goals for trying to make sure those economies reach some of their development targets. I wanted to ask you both to reflect upon what that means for you as a business, how you think about those developed economies or developing economies, and how that affects your outlook for a sustainable energy future. Maybe we'll start with Minister Al-Kaabi and then go to you, Ryan.
You're absolutely right. I think the pandemic has taken a toll on the biggest economy in the world, the U.S., and you see how that was affected. I mean, and then you work down from there. I mean, everybody has got hit by this economy, and a resilient economy like the U.S. having that kind of impact, I think, just tells you how severe others, were hit. So I feel really for a lot of people that were hit by this economic downturn, and whether it's people losing their jobs, losing some loved ones. I mean, more importantly, I think there have been a lot of casualties, and our thoughts and prayers go out to all of humanity that has been lost, unfortunately, for this from this COVID virus. So I think it will affect our business somewhat, in not only the short term demand destruction that happened, where we came to almost a halt in everything related to our industry. I mean, planes were grounded and so on, and it will take, I think, to probably go to pandemic level. It will take probably till sometime in mid to end of 2022 to have a resemblance of normalcy. I think come back probably, and I hope sooner. And then it will pick up slowly. In some of these downturns, you see a very quick rebound sometimes, with economies rebounding back quickly. And you look at economic models and how these things panned out in the past. I mean, you could have different trajectories, and sometimes they could be very, very quick recovery. And I'm hopeful for that. I think we can support from the gas business at least, and the oil and gas business in general, is that to make sure that we support in infrastructure, we support in our capabilities to reach these customers. There are a lot of customers, and there are a lot of countries where they are deprived from basic electricity, even in some of these developing nations. So I think we need to be pitching, to help with the infrastructure and to help them come back and help their economies, because it takes two to tango. As they say, I think you need a buyer, you need a seller that are both healthy. Otherwise, if one of them is not healthy, it doesn't work.
That's great. Yeah, Ryan, how do we get all the tangoing started?
Yeah, yeah, the to and fro, and it's our industry is pretty unusual and unique from a supply-demand perspective, and certainly, I don't think we understand the full extent of the COVID-related changes in consumption patterns and work from home and all that. Certainly, there's going to be, we believe, probably some demand destruction as a result of what we've learned and the future of work and all those kinds of issues coming out of the pandemic. And we're hearing some talk about an earlier peak oil. I don't know. We run a lot of scenarios inside our company, and I can say a couple of things that I'm pretty certain about, and that is, demand will recover. We will get back to a pre-pandemic level. I agree with His Excellency. We don't view it as probably something that happens till maybe 2022, sometime later in 2022. But oil is so vital to the economy. It today represents 31% of the total energy consumed. And there's a very wide range of demand projections, going forward. But it does inform one thing, and His Excellency mentioned it, the lack of investment that has occurred, even in the lowest of the scenarios where oil may represent 55 million barrels a day of a 120 million barrel a day market. It's going to take probably $8.5 trillion of cumulative investment, even in the IEA's low case scenario. That's over $350 billion a year. And we haven't done that as an industry for the last 2 or 3 years. So it just, starts to illuminate the challenge that's out there to continue to deliver, affordable, reliable energy to all four corners of the world, coming out of this pandemic when the demand starts to grow. And there's some uniqueness on the supply side too. Certainly, I think LNG demand, and His Excellency would probably know better than me, but I think it grew about 1% in 2020, even during a pandemic year on the LNG side. So the gas demand, is still there and is going to be growing. We think it's going to be a robust, growth over the years, and certainly could get accelerated if countries will agree that they need to take coal out of the system and put more natural gas into it. So I think it's going to be a unique ride. As we say, there's going to be a good tango dance going on between buyers and sellers, consumers and producers and suppliers around the world in order to meet the growing energy demand that we know is going to be there. But how do we do that more sustainably? And certainly solar and wind and the renewables are going to have a role to play in that. But we certainly believe that oil and natural gas are going to have a very significant role to play in that emerging future as well.
Lots of uncertainties to navigate. I would like to turn now. We've got a number of questions from the audience, so if we can move through them quickly, I'll try and get in as many as we can. The first, for Your Excellency, want to start. We've got Svetlana from the Netherlands who asks, what are your views on the potential for renewable solar power in Qatar? on its own and in combination with natural gas, for instance, for hybrid gas to liquids, power to liquid solutions to make low carbon fuels and products?
A very good question. I think we definitely see solar as an important part of the renewable part of our energy system, if you will, in Qatar, and we are building as we speak the largest single project that was sanctioned in this area, 800 megawatts of solar power that will be up and running by the first quarter of next year, 2022. So it's being constructed now. So that's 800 megawatts of power. We're a small country. Our total power requirement was 8,500 megawatts last year. So 800 is about 10% of that power. So although being a gas-rich country and we have plenty of resources, gas resources, we're still doing a lot of renewable. In addition to that, we've taken a decision. We're going to start construction probably next year of another 800 megawatts to replace gas turbine power for our own industrial captive power use. So that's also in our effort and part of our sustainability strategy to reduce our carbon footprint. So we see that as a strong part of our business.
Great, thank you. And Ryan, for you, Alex from the United States asks, environmental and social stakeholders continue to request tangible and quantifiable evidence of results. I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier. In your experience, what metrics will best demonstrate tangible progress in this area?
Yeah, it's a good question, Alex. I think you do, as I mentioned earlier, it is about, you manage what you measure. And for us, I think things like emissions intensity. So we need to take ourselves down to as low as emissions intensity so that we measure kilograms per barrel of equivalent CO2. So those are some of the metrics that we look at. I think fugitive methane emissions, that's an issue associated with natural gas production. So I think as an industry, we have to try to measure how much fugitive methane emissions that we're producing. So I talked about continuous monitoring in some of our facilities around the world, so we can get a handle on how much is going. It's interesting as an industry, you spill a cup of oil and we're terrified and we want to clean it up as quickly as we can. And some in industry thinks this, just because you can't see methane and it gets emitted and it's an invisible gas, that it's okay, and it shouldn't be okay. We should want to be keeping it in our pipes and in our vessels. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that. And then I talked a little bit about flaring. I think we need to reduce routine flaring. We need to get flaring down. That's a real problem around the whole world. It's a problem in some of the other producing countries around the world, and it's a problem here in the United States. We need to look at, as a percent of our gas production, how much are we flaring, and are we only doing that in upset conditions? So when we have a upset condition at one of our facilities, we flare, but not a part of our routine operations. We shouldn't be flaring. So those are some of the things that we think about that can demonstrate a company's ability to be more sustainable and reduce our emission footprint.
So the last question is from George from the United Arab Emirates, and he asks, how long do you think gas will remain a transitional or pro-ecological transformation energy source, considering the progress made in renewable energy sources? Well, Minister Al-Kaabi, I think you've addressed a little bit of this, but would you like to add anything to George's question?
Yes. George has a very sophisticated question there, but very simply put, I would say that from maybe self-serving, but that's how we see it. We think gas is going to be there for the indefinite future. We don't think it's a transition fuel. We think it's a destination fuel, part of the transition journey. And I think from as far as gas is concerned, we will need it. There is no total alternative to just take out any fossil fuel that can be foreseen today. But gas will play a big part, and definitely renewable is going to grow at a much faster pace than we did in the past. But the cost element is going to, I think, restrict how much you can do. I think it's going to get cheaper, you're going to get more, but the intermittence, as we mentioned later, will restrict some of that too. But I think gas is here to stay.
Ryan.
Yeah, I think agree absolutely, and I think it's a critical piece of the future. As we said, that you have to have base load. You have to deal with the intermittency and the fact that renewables don't run all the time. The levelized cost of electricity from renewables is about equivalent to gas now here in the United States. So it is going to be a part of the mix, but it's intermittent, and so it has to have base load. And I think gas plays a critical role in that. And as I said earlier, too, one of the fastest ways to get on a transitional lower carbon future is to displace coal with gas. And if the Far East did that, we would have a much cleaner planet as a result of it. And so if we could build less coal plants and use more natural gas from the abundant resource that we have as a planet, I think we'd be much better off as a planet as well. So I would agree wholeheartedly. It's more than just a transition fuel. It's a very important baseload.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a really wonderful discussion. I want to give you an opportunity to maybe, leave us with some closing thoughts before we hand things back to Etna. So maybe Minister Al-Kaabi, we'll start with you, and then Ryan will get some comments.
First, I'd like to thank you for doing such a great job in hosting us today, and I'd like to thank really the organizers for inviting me to this great event. I wish everybody to stay safe. I hope that we can do this in person next time. We all miss seeing each other. So I would like to just close by saying, thank you very much. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. And Ryan?
Yeah, similar hopes that we can meet in person. I know Houston is proud to be the host of the WPC this year. We fought hard and got it to come to Houston, but we hope we can see everybody in person. And I know the global pandemic hopefully will be behind us, and we can meet in person and continue the discussion that you've had here with us today, Sarah, on these important topics about sustainability and the future of the energy industry and how we can be part of the solution going forward. So thank you for the questions, and appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you both very much. I mean, I will just say I'll take away from this conversation some of the really important messages that you delivered on having ambition, but delivering on credibility, thinking about the importance of risk management and partnerships. I think all of that is really great insight that we can share with everybody who's trying to think hard about how to chart this transition to the energy future. So I share your well wishes to everybody for a healthier and happier 2021. But now I'm going to hand it back to Etna, and who's going to give closing comments and share with us what's coming up in episode 4 of Spotlight. So, Etna?
And thank you, Sarah. And a big thanks to His Excellency Al-Kaabi and to Mr. Ryan Lance also. Thank you both for sharing your views on a sustainable energy future. Now, of course, as you've just heard, balance is particularly important when it comes to tackling the energy transition. Renewables are certainly going to be a growing part of the energy mix in the future to help solve environmental challenges, but it won't happen overnight. And it appears there's a bit of a reliability gap between conventional and renewable resources. The outlook for natural gas is looking bright, and we heard that LNG as a bridge fuel has an important role in delivering the future low-carbon economy. No surprise, partnerships will continue to be vitally important to the industry. And it'll be this collaboration that will also drive innovation with governments as well as with the private sector playing a role in technology development. However, we definitely heard words of caution there, maybe indeed a warning about underinvestment in the industry. So suppliers, developers, producers, governments and consumers need to, let's say, tango a bit so that everybody can actually succeed. Our panelists both agreed that what can be measured can be fixed. So this is very important. And plans, of course, to deal with Scope 1 and 2 emissions have set us on a course to meet net zero ambitions. We heard there how the industry credibility and ambitions are linked as companies indeed and their partners look to manage risks and still be competitive. With a pre-pandemic recovery not expected till 2022, the challenge and opportunity will now be to continue to deliver clean, affordable, reliable energy to the four corners of the world. And yet the industry needs to do this while carefully managing the transition to a low-carbon future. So lots of valuable content there for everybody's interest. Now, a replay of this discussion will be available on the WPC website. Check out video on demand, viewing within 24 hours. And of course, you can listen in more detail, and do tell your friends and colleagues to take a look. We're going to be working on episode 4 of Spotlight in the coming weeks, and I'm really looking forward to that. Our next session will do a deep dive and big focus on building partnerships. So we'll send you details much closer to the date. One date you will definitely need to remember later this year will be for the 23rd World Petroleum Congress in Texas. It is scheduled for December 5th to the 9th, 2021, and we're planning to see you there in person. Now, I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of Spotlight. Until next time, please follow us, the 23rd World Petroleum Congress, and all of our media outlets, hashtag 23WPC 2021. Be sure to be staying involved, and feel free to share this webinar with your friends and colleagues. So that's it from me, Etna Trainer, and from all of us at the World Petroleum Congress and the very busy Spotlight team who are keeping you informed. Thank you so much for joining us.